Welcome to another story made by Oracle One. My grandmother's garden was unlike any other I had ever seen. Even as a child, I could tell that there was something strange about it. The flowers bloomed with a richness and color that never seemed to fade, even under the overcast sky or the darkest of nights. It was a small patch in the corner of her backyard, encased by a wooden fence that stood too high for me to peek over. The plants grew in a tight cluster, as if they were huddling together for some secret warmth, but the sunlight barely touched them. In fact, none of the flowers required sun. They seemed to thrive in shadow and gloom, and the earth they rooted in smelled faintly of iron, a scent that made me wrinkle my nose in discomfort. My grandmother was a frail woman by the time I came to live with her after my parents' sudden disappearance. She was quiet and reserved, with thin, bony hands that moved like spider legs when she worked in the garden. Whenever I asked her about the flowers or tried to dig in the soil, she would sternly forbid me, her voice low and sharp. "You mustn't touch that, child," she warned. "There are things better left buried beneath the earth." Her eyes, once soft and warm, seemed to flash with a strange warning I didn't fully understand. But as children often do, I was drawn to the mystery rather than deterred. The flowers beckoned me like a siren's call, unnatural and hauntingly beautiful. On cold evenings, the garden was wrapped in mist that rolled in off the nearby forest. The air around the flowers shimmered and pulsed, as if charged with some dark energy that refused to be explained by natural science. At night, I sometimes caught glimpses of shadows moving in the garden, figures that were neither fully human nor animal, flickering just beyond the edge of my vision. I'd blink, and they were gone, leaving only the cold iron scent hanging in the air. "Grandmother, who's there?" I whispered once during such a night, but she told me to go back inside. "The garden is no place for children after dark," she said. Days passed, and my unease grew into obsession. I would sit for hours on the creaky porch, eyes fixed on the garden's strange blooms. The flowers weren't like anything I had seen before, petals smooth and dark, glistening as if wet, yet they never wilted or lost their shape. Their colors were otherworldly, deep crimson, black as pitch, with veins of glowing red darting beneath the surface. They pulsed as if breathing, a subtle throbbing that filled the silent air like a heartbeat. No insects visited them, no birds dared perch nearby. It was as if the garden was its own living entity, thriving in isolation. I remember the first time I tried to dig. It was a foggy morning, the kind when the house felt too quiet, too empty. My hands trembled as I reached into the soil near the center of the garden where the largest flower grew. The iron scent filled my nostrils, thick and metallic. I pressed my fingers into the damp earth, and then something cold and hard cracked beneath my touch. Before I could grasp what it was, a voice as sharp as broken glass stopped me. "Leave it alone," my grandmother hissed, appearing by my side as if summoned, her eyes blazing with ancient fury. She yanked my hand away and plucked the spade from my grasp. "This garden is not for the living to dig," she said firmly. Her voice dropped to an almost inaudible whisper. "It holds what must not see the light." I was terrified and confused, and when I looked at her, she seemed suddenly fragile again, a weakening woman battling some invisible torment. That night, sleep was elusive. I kept seeing cracked earth, something buried moving beneath the garden like a restless beast. Unable to restrain my curiosity, I began to watch my grandmother more closely. Her daily ritual was peculiar. At dawn, she would go out to tend the garden, humming softly under her breath, her fingers tracing shapes over the soil as if whispering to some unseen presence. She never watered the plants in the usual way, not even when it rained. Instead, she sprinkled a dark, thick liquid from a small bottle she kept hidden near the fence. It smelled pungent and rusty. Once or twice, I thought I glimpsed her muttering strange words, her mouth moving in a slow, melodic chant that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. The villagers nearby never spoke of my grandmother's garden except in hushed tones. I overheard fragments of conversation when I accompanied her to the market. Old Mrs. Halbrook, who sold honey and preserved fruit, cast wary glances at the garden when I mentioned it. "Her plants grow because of the earth she's fed," Mrs. Halbrook said cryptically, "but those flowers pay a terrible price." I pressed her for more, but her eyes darkened, and she shook her head. "Some gardens are cursed, dear child. It's best you leave it be." The ominous aura of the garden began to creep into my dreams. I dreamt of roots winding through bones, of petals sprouting from skulls. The iron smell was suffocating, thick in my mind even when I was awake. I grew restless, the urging to uncover the truth burning inside me. One night, under a sliver of sickly moon, I slipped out of bed and crept quietly to the garden. The fence was rickety, but I managed to crawl under it. The soil was cool beneath my knees. The flowers glowed faintly with an unnatural light, bathing the night in a crimson hue. Heart-pounding, I felt my way along the earth, searching for anything buried beneath. Suddenly, my fingers brushed against something smooth yet sticky, damp and cold like fresh blood. Panic seized me. I scrambled backward, knocking over a flower stem that snapped with a hollow crack. Then a sound, a soft scraping, came from beneath the soil. It grew louder, more desperate, like nails clawing to escape a coffin. I froze, my breath hitching. The flowers around me seemed to quiver, their dark petals curling inward as if recoiling. From the earth spilled a thin, black ooze, spreading in ringlets over the ground until it pooled at my feet. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs were stiff with terror. A low murmuring voice whispered from the garden, a sibilant hiss coaxing me to stay. Help us, it begged. Shadows coalesced near the roots, forming twisted shapes, human forms trapped beneath the earth. Their hollow eyes glimmered with silent anguish. I recognized one figure among them. It was my mother, her face pale and distorted. I cried out and stumbled back, heart pounding like a war drum. The garden was no longer just a patch of strange flowers. It was a tomb. A prison for those my grandmother had hidden away beneath the iron-stained soil. I realized then that the garden's unnatural blooms were nourished by the blood of the buried. The iron sent the smell of rusted bones and old wounds. Each plant a reminder, each petal a sign of the lives stolen and sacrificed. I tore myself free from the garden and ran to my grandmother's house. The door creaked open before I could knock, and she stood inside, her expression weary but resolute. "You've seen too much," she said softly. "Now you know why I guard the soil so fiercely. The garden must hold them, or else the darkness spills free." Her voice held a grim finality that chilled me. "What are they? Why are they here?" I demanded, desperate for answers. "They were taken by a curse long before you were born," she explained, eyes clouded with sorrow. "The forest demanded a price for the peace it grants. Those lost souls. They are bound here, feeding the garden's life and holding back the shadow beyond. Can they be freed?" My voice trembled. "No," she said flatly. "If the soil breaks, if you dig too deep, the roots of that curse will unravel, and the world will drown in darkness." Days turned into restless nights as I grappled with the terrible truth. I could no longer look at the garden with wonder, only dread. I stayed close to my grandmother, learning her routines, the whispered chants she muttered to keep the garden sealed tight. Her health was fading, and with it, the strength to maintain the barrier. One evening, the sky darkened unnaturally early, and a cold wind tore through the trees. The flowers quivered violently. The iron scent thickened to a choking fog that seeped into my lungs. My grandmother clutched my arm with surprising strength. "It's beginning," she warned. "The curse awakens." The ground trembled beneath our feet as cracks appeared in the earth, snaking toward the flowers like veins. From the fissures spilled the black ooze, crawling dark shapes emerging slowly, twisted, despairing shadows of the lost trapped souls. They reached for us with gnarled hands, their mournful wails shaking the air. The garden was breaking apart, spilling its dark secrets. Desperately, my grandmother chanted louder, her voice rising above the moans of the damned. I watched as her hands moved in patterns, ancient and intricate, calling upon something beyond comprehension. The flowers pulsed brighter, their colors flaring in a final burst of terrible beauty. The iron scent burned fierce now, sharp and metallic, as if the garden itself were bleeding. A searing light enveloped the garden, blinding us. When I opened my eyes, the black shapes were gone. The earth had sealed back over the fissures, and the flowers stood, eerily still but alive. My grandmother sank to her knees, exhausted but relieved. "The dark's been held at bay, for now," she whispered. She pulled me close and said, "You must promise me, child. Never dig in the garden. Never disturb what lies beneath. Some things are buried for a reason. Tend the flowers, keep the soil sealed. It is your burden now." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking deep into my soul. I understood at last that my grandmother's garden was a prison of darkness and sacrifice hidden beneath a veil of beauty. The flowers that grew without sun, in iron-tainted soil, were nourished by ancient grief and cursed blood. The garden was no longer just her secret, it had become mine. Years passed, and I became the guardian of that haunted patch of earth. I tended the strange blossoms, whispered the old chants my grandmother taught me, and lived with the knowledge of the restless souls beneath my feet. The iron scent never left the air, a constant reminder of the price paid for growth without light. Sometimes, on misty nights, I still glimpse shadows moving beneath the flowers' glow, hear soft, desperate whispers carried on the wind. I never dig in the soil. My hands tremble at the thought. Some secrets are best left buried deep, where their dark roots can feed but never grow too strong to break free. And so I protect my grandmother's garden, her legacy of darkness and bloom, trapped forever between shadow and light. For more stories, like and subscribe.